Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special episode of ASBN Live, a dialogue on the opportunity to advance land and ocean conservation and a sustainable economy.
The American Sustainable Business Network is a movement builder in partnership with the business and investor community. As a multi-issue membership organization, we're advocating on behalf of businesses of all sectors, size, and geography. We are so pleased to also have as a co-sponsor today Businesses for Conservation and Climate Action, BCCA. This is a groundbreaking initiative that ASBN has helped to develop with many leaders across the country. It is my humble and great honor to welcome you, Secretary Haaland.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. Thank you for everything you do. Really, really happy to be here. Thank you for talking about the President's America the Beautiful initiative, which we're so excited about here at the Department of the Interior, and you know, just mentioning the fact that community-led conservation works. We are happy to move that idea forward every single day in the work that we do. I appreciate the focus on land and ocean conservation as part of a sustainable economy. It makes perfect sense. We are charged with the highest trust responsibility here at the Department of protecting tribal interests, furthering our nation-to-nation relationship with Indian tribes. We have a distinct responsibility to ensure that all decisions that we make that relate to federal stewardship of lands, waters, and wildlife include consideration of how to safeguard the treaties, spiritual subsistence, cultural interests of tribes across the country. Co-stewardship, it's not just an obligation for us, it's a tremendous opportunity. And by acknowledging and treating Indian tribes as partners in co-stewardship of our lands and waters will undoubtedly strengthen our federal land and resources management. This administration, all of us here at Interior are committed to our future through conservation, and always so happy to have conversations and listen to folks and appreciate being here. David, thank you so much, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Secretary Haaland. Now it's my pleasure to turn it to Wizipan Garriott, who's the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the U.S. Department of the Interior.
I'm joining today with just a tremendous amount of joy and gratitude in my heart. You know, every day I get to work with amazing people, and you know, to serve under the leadership of Secretary Haaland, and you know, to see my good friend David, and to watch all the great work that he and others are doing is just amazing, and to be a part of a group like that is just an honor and privilege. I'm really excited today to talk about Native co-stewardship and what some of those opportunities are. There's an incredible opportunity because of the nexus between tribes and tribal socio-economic development and economic needs, desires and plans, federal policy, and the private sector, you know, and perhaps most important, conservation and the planet, and all of those interests can and should and must intersect, and it creates unprecedented opportunity. We've used the word bold today, and you know, bold actions, bold words have to be supported by bold action, and this administration has made historic investments, not only into the country and into clean energy, into other areas, but also into tribal communities. When we talk about investments, you know, we're also talking about a policy investment, and tribal co-stewardship is a down payment on the future of our country and really the future of our landscape. We are in the process of developing new regulations for taking land into trust. And in our consultations and in the draft that we had put out, one of the purposes, and this is a change in the regulations and how federal Indian tribes can take land into trust, we have put forward that tribes can take land into trust not only for economic development purposes, but for cultural purposes as well as conservation purposes. And so that is another really, really important part of this. We know that tribes have tremendous opportunity around renewable energy, and those tribes that would like to unlock those resources for themselves, not only for tribal energy sovereignty, but also to provide that energy to others throughout the country. We need to be doing a better job in terms of how we're going to be doing that and working with tribes and being a value add as opposed to a hindrance to that process. We know, all of us here, I think, know and understand that given tribes' millennia and their unique historical and ties to the land, that once a tribe gets land, it's going to be protected. And they're going to protect it for as long as that tribe exists.
Thank you, Wizipan, and really appreciate that. And as he mentioned, we'll be doing a set of questions as time allows. It's our pleasure to have a number of ASBN, BCCA leaders whose Indigenous-led efforts exemplify, what is possible. And, first up is Dune Lankard, the president and founder of Native Conservancy.
Thank you, David. And good morning, Secretary Deb Haaland. And I wanted you to know that all of us Indigenous peoples in Alaska were thrilled when you were appointed the Secretary of the Interior. And Wizi, it's nice to say hello again. And I really appreciated your words. They give us hope up here in the north. Alaska is changing faster than most places. The permafrost, the sea ice, and the glaciers are melting beyond belief, therefore quickly impacting our unique subsistence and wild salmon way of life here. With climate changing everything, we realized that after preserving 1 million acres of wild salmon habitat in the Exxon spill zone, that preserving the lands wasn't enough. We had to figure out how to grow things both on the land and in the sea. We also decided to figure out how to source our own wild kelp seed. And we certified native divers to locate, harvest, deploy, and monitor Indigenous-owned kelp farms. There is currently no Mariculture Act for Alaska or America for that matter. Yet world kelp sales have risen from 9 billion to 15.6 billion since COVID broke out. That's an 11% increase in growth annually. For Indigenous peoples, this ocean industry is about restoration of our oceans first, growing a traditional food source that keeps our people healthy and strong second, and creating a good paying blue-green regenerative economy that brings our native women and children back home to our villages. Indigenous people should not have to fight processors, corporations, pro-development districts, and outsiders for Justice 40 funds. We feel we need these $50 to $100 million community grants to lead this quickly emerging ocean industry that is happening on our ancestral waters. This is our land and our waters. It is time for ocean back. This new, yet very old ocean resource has the potential to build a regenerative economy based on conservation, restoration, and mitigation, not further extraction of Alaska's natural resources, which would be another first. And the last thing I'd like to mention is that 30 by 30 just cannot happen without tribes leading. I've always felt that as the original stewards and guardians of the ocean and the land, that if we're going to conserve the land and create these sustainable economies for the future, that Indigenous peoples need to lead.
So next, I'd like to turn to Emily Boyd-Valandra, who's the president at Buffalo Nation's Grasslands Alliance. Emily, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you, everyone. I'm honored to have been asked to be here and to share a little bit today. So mitaku yepi, greetings relatives. I'm also si Lakota here in South Central South Dakota. I've been part of the BCCA steering committee, but today I'm kind of here as my role as the president, I guess newly elected president of our Buffalo Nation's Grasslands Alliance. So where we originally started with sustainable financing as our goal, we've grown and kind of blossomed to include our people, our land, and everything that we all know is involved in that. So we're kind of focused in a region of the Northern Great Plains. So we have about 15, 16 Native nations in that region that we like to support. And so our vision and our plan is to kind of ensure that grasslands and native wildlife are restored or enhanced. We also want to ensure that tribal members thrive by sustainably stewarding and connecting with their natural resources. And that fish and game departments have the capacity to deliver conservation impacts at scale. So some of the goals that Bingas have identified in the next 10 years is we'd like to see about 30% of tribal land in the Northern Great Plains is under some type of native-led conservation management. We'd also like to see that there's 10 paths of connectivity that are secured for Native nations in the Northern Great Plains that would support culturally and ecologically important wildlife species through native-led conservation management. Another one is that we'd like to see new sustainable and natural resource-based enterprises and jobs in Native communities that are created. And then I think a fourth big goal of ours is that tribal members' understandings and connections between people and nature are preserved and strengthened. And this includes our Indigenous lifeways that are promoted and opportunities for tribal members to engage with nature and making sure that we have access to all of that. Sorry, another thing that I wanted to touch on today, I know there's so much good stuff being talked about, but I really want to thank Wizipan for talking about our Indigenous knowledge, especially at the level that he's at. We're really finding some great opportunities, some partnerships, some leadership at really higher levels that we haven't seen in a long time. But because of that, we really need to make sure that we're doing the work here on our nations within our communities to make sure that when we are being asked what our voices are and are being asked to be heard, we have a voice. Planning within Indigenous communities hasn't always been the best because it hasn't been by us or for us, but I really feel like there's a need right now for better planning within our communities and finally getting to a point to say, this is our goal, this is what it's going to take to reach it, and kind of identifying the gaps that we have to reach those. Because what's happening is we're having, I don't know if it's post-COVID or because of all of the connections that we made from Zoom, but there's really a lot of partners that are wanting to help, but they don't necessarily know how. And so one thing that I always want to stress is that if we can take that back to our Indigenous communities to say, yes, now is the time, we do need a plan. We do need to have a plan that's not just a template from this tribe to somebody else, that acknowledges our uniqueness. And then of course, finds our commonalities that we can build from.
Well, thank you, Emily. And I think, what we're using this conversation today, talking fast and all, is to try and squeeze in, at least to offer up, a foundation for the dialogue and for the work to follow up. So we're committed to finding the partnerships with everyone on the call and obviously the many others out there that want to help move this work forward.
Hi, thank you so much for letting me join today. As David mentioned, I'm with the Intertribal Agriculture Council. I'm their Director of Policy and Government Relations. And so the question I have is, does the department have plans to address either resource training issues or cost barriers that have stalled tribal access to some of the conservation opportunities like agricultural resource management plans? And if so, what approach might the department take or facilitate to remove some of these hurdles?
I've seen some leases, that like do not, they're written in such a way that they're ineligible for either tribes as landowners or for producers to access USDA conservation programs. And that's one of the things that we were thinking of, that we would really like to consider when we're thinking about new ag regulations is how can we develop new regulations, amended regulations that will promote a lot of the goals that we've been talking about today. Want to make this very, very clear that Indigenous ag came and comes before regenerative ag. That all of the regenerative ag principles that everyone's talking about, and it's kind of the new rage, that comes from indigenous ag, and indigenous ag is indigenous knowledge. And so that really needs to be the foundation. So how can we promote, again, using that term, regenerative ag, indigenous ag, that will benefit people and the planet? That's something that's really important. And I'm really glad that you bring up the agricultural resource management plan component as well, because I think we've heard over and over again that we need to do more work there. And I would really, really welcome a further conversation on that and how we can think about doing a better job there.
Sierra?
Hello, everyone. My name is Sierra Flanagan. I'm here on behalf of the Livable Planet Working Group. I'd like to ask, what's the opportunity for business leaders and investors to lend our expertise and dollars to really support the co-stewardship, ocean and land protection, and indigenous science initiatives we're hearing about here?
You know, one of the best ways, most effective ways to forward conservation is to work directly with a tribe, right? You know, because if you're in from a philanthropy standpoint, helping the tribe acquire land or consolidate land that they can then use to put into conservation. And conservation does also, you want to make sure that that doesn't exclude economic opportunity, right? We talked about indigenous ag, you know, we just heard from Dune and the amazing work that he's doing. There's some amazing work happening around buffalo. The tribes in the Northwest are the world leaders in fish. So conservation and economic development go hand in hand. And then so the second piece I want to talk a little bit about is, you know, our work. You know, we are working to stand up an office of strategic public-private partnerships, where we here at Indian Affairs can work with tribes that are seeking to develop conservation projects, and then also work with philanthropy and others to help matchmake and to bring those two groups together. I don't think that has always happened, but I think that we're on the verge. The work is happening more than it has, and I think that we're going to see a lot more of it happening over the next couple of years. So, you know, we would always be happy to have a conversation with any group out there and work together to figure out how we can bring those two worlds together.
My name is Terrence Harris. I'm the Indigenous Business Outreach Coordinator for the Business for Conservation and Climate Action, or BCCA, as David so kindly and very thoroughly explained at the beginning of the call. Understanding that since time immemorial, tribes have developed land and water stewardship practices across many diverse ecosystems on this continent. What is your advice on how any tribal members and communities seeking to start or grow their own business can continue to uphold these practices in partnership with DOI and BIA, and how can they learn how can they learn more beyond this webinar? And also, how can groups like BCCA and ASBN support these efforts?
That's an amazing question, you know, and it's kind of geared towards both individuals as entrepreneurs, you know, and indigenous entrepreneurs. You know, one resource, we have two resources that I think are really helpful and important. One, within the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs, we have the Office of Indian Economic Development, which provides to tribes various grant resources, including planning resources, and the tribes can use for feasibility studies and work like that. And then also administers the Indian Loan Guarantee Program, which over the last, I think between 2017 and 21 has put over $500 million out to Indian businesses across the country. So I think that's one kind of technical resource that we can offer. Also, within the BIA Office of Trust Services, we have a lot of different programs where we provide technical assistance and services directly to tribes and tribal businesses, particularly around energy and energy development. And I'd mentioned earlier that we need to start doing a better job around promoting and working with around renewable energy. So that's another amazing resource. Within that, Office of Trust Services, we also have our ag department here at Department of Interior, and I think that that's a great and growing resource there as well. But in general, I don't, kind of coming from this world, and I think it's something that a lot of Native people have intuitively. We grew up with it, or we're exposed to it, but we don't necessarily attach these kind of fancy concept words to it, right? And so I think that part of it is just acknowledging that we do have this knowledge. It's inherent, and we may not realize it, but it's about kind of unlocking that inner potential.
That's great. I have a few, we're closing on time, but we've got a few more questions that have come in, and maybe I'll just try and tackle some of them. I got one from Rudy Arredondo from the National Latino Farmers and Ranchers, who's asking what initiatives are in place to respond to wildfires, infrastructure development on native lands, and especially access to rural broadband.
There's a lot.
Yeah, sorry. You got three things, each of which could, yeah, well, thank you, Rudy.
Okay, so fire, in the bipartisan infrastructure law, we saw a historic investment, in the magnitude of hundreds of millions of dollars that were put towards wildfire. And that also includes tribes and as a part of the kind of interagency wildfire working group that Department of Interior and its various sub-agencies has with USDA. So there's more resources out and being put out there than ever before. Going back to traditional ecological knowledge, we got to incorporate that into our land management and kind of emergency response systems, especially around fire. Tribes have been doing that for a long time. What was the other? There was two other. Was fire and
broadband
and
infrastructure development on native land.
Infrastructure again, in the bipartisan infrastructure law, another historic investment, $3 billion plus has been allocated for tribal broadband and infrastructure, and that is at the Department of Commerce is managing that. And if you've been following the news, there's been some pretty big, grant announcements to tribes. And those announcements have been in the, I think one was like 45 million, another like 75 million, like big ones. From our part, right? So Commerce is putting the money out, giving the money to the tribes. But from our part, we're really involved in the permitting and rights of way process. And so we put out a national policy memo directing our field offices to work directly with other agencies and with tribes and to prioritize permitting and rights of way processes for any broadband project in Indian country and for all projects that are funded by the bipartisan infrastructure law. Because the money's there, but it's got to get spent, and we want to reduce bureaucracy as much as possible. Doing it in a responsible way, though, we're not going to forego our duties to make sure that we're adhering and to all of our environmental regulations. But we're going to be doing this to get the money out as quickly as possible. And in infrastructure, again, more historic investments in infrastructure than we've ever seen before. I think we're going to see some really great work happening around electric vehicles and EVs in Indian country, as well as just, again, historic investments into our road infrastructure as well.
There's a lot more questions coming in, and what I would also advise is if folks will gather these, and we're happy to pass them along to Wizipan and the like, so folks want to add their questions into the chat along with their email, then we'll be able to gather those later. But I guess, before we close out, just even if you could touch on it in a moment, listen, I think there's tremendous concern whether it is, how to protect tribal lands and enforce treaty rights. There's one question about from state seizure under eminent domain. And I think there's, grave concerns also about, some of the fossil fuel infrastructure, that, many are, well, that we think are possible, after the Inflation Reduction Act and the like. And so, particularly those running through indigenous lands, let alone other lands and the like. So, how do these treaties hold up? How do these agreements and these protections, with the incredible work that you do? And if you could just take it's terrible, we only have a few minutes left, but if you could take a minute to at least lead us in the right direction, and then we'll work to close out.
Two things. One, I talked about our new land into trust regulations. So critical, so important. The state can't take exercise eminent domain on federal land, and so if tribes are able to put that land into trust, that land is a whole set of protections that would not exist otherwise. And I also want to put a plug in for our fiscal year 23 budget request that we put out, where we actually requested money for land acquisition to work with tribes on acquiring land, which they could then put into trust. So that's something that is an incredibly useful tool. And then, this broad question around working with tribes and whatnot. Consultation is really the backbone. And Executive Order 13175 is a directive to our federal agencies around consultation, that we need to begin working and having a meaningful dialogue with tribes as soon as possible when we're requiring and considering any kind of project. Because if we don't do it, and if we do it as an afterthought, that does not work. It won't work. It has to be early and consistent, meaningful with the decision makers at the table. And so to start those dialogues and to hear everyone, we have to work with consultation. And I think that people can be looking forward to a new consultation policy. We issued a draft one and have consulted on our consultation policy. And tribes have made some really great and important and insightful recommendations as that's being developed.
Well, thank you for that. Tough questions, but phenomenal work by all of you, and thank you, Wizipan, for your incredible leadership at the Department of Interior Bureau of Indian Affairs. We're so pleased to have had the Secretary on along with you today, and all this to say that the work is ongoing, and we just thank everyone for joining us today, and we hope that you'll stay in touch with Businesses for Conservation and Climate Action and the American Sustainable Business Network. The contact information will end up on the screen in a moment, but it's also in the chat. But we hope that you can join up and step up our efforts to work collaboratively and collectively. That's the opportunity that we have to protect our land and oceans and to build a more just, inclusive, and sustainable economy. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and let's get to work.
Thank you, everyone.